Lama Nangam Bajambe, Mashata, Boy, Kongelo, Nitra Nandara, Jamgön Kongtrül Lodrö Thaye, Kunda Sega, Mare, Mentam, Dunages, Rosogun La Paja, Tazayan La Joyum, Son, Dotarach, Pneumonia Long Ledge, Jadron, Ronzaja, Mare, Mesradum Ranuk. Jinye Jenze Rajinam Dana Dogin Saju Tarzan Den Lozoja Setuko Yunra Jodon Jinye Jenja Dalam Zan Jambe Yung Lai Zedin Cheche Chera Uzraje Dalu Demu Membar Srane Kadon Den Ju Junglu Dokwaye Lodrö Pope Nong Zagu So Tample to Jachari to Don, Yenjim to Duje Bonjamba, Serge, Lamboda, Urjibego, Shagje, Shavlang, Sal, Shekala, Kira Jinguraje, Zebe, Don Dujen Labo, Yarve, then by goodness on Zebe, Kajurimbo, Chela, Shaje, Rikam Saban, Mendru Dambesu, Reveni Lomje, Lobru Chamajo, Desin Kujin, Revu Tarzebe, Yonza Lama, Jubrachela, Lasso, Ta Jabsun Drove, Semnon Shonju, Chodo, Semje Parambochi, Ni, Sartamne, Sero, Nang.
So please, as usual, begin by taking refuge in the three jewels, the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha, and then arouse the sincere and heartfelt intention to awaken to the body-mind in its two perspectives.
Lasso, Ta Tachila Sosor Gambe Sushi on two. Tella Nanseke Sosotan Shet Deni Jir Doa Sumla Tangbushinella
Soso Dun She Tene De Ni Yimpache
De Niche, then Rigdoa.
Rigdoa.
Tandere Doa Shinek Hatung Jeshe Rigdoa, the Nancy Tango Nikiru Sungdoa, subject.
Ja, gå till Amazon då. Shila ni tang rigdoa.
Ja.
Dini rigdoa.
Deni Rigdoa. Tandere Kasheroa. Shinegan and the Descent Rover and the Descent Rover Songa.
Reda shinneginang segi batang laktongi nang segi jeba. Tene deni rigdoa.
Ja.
Nang segi jeva den sogi rigdoa. Ergo.
Mare Rigdoa said in Deredoa. Penna Ta Sanjegi Dodan, Judetsu and the Songway, Zalung Gamye, Trunkor Jevia, and then so Kang dress and Kashe Shinen and Padu, Kashe Latung do to the Zegusarwa. Ma won a young dote.
Da tanda sapche sum tenso pecha chasanga sapche sum tsovu sum la tsigo genduga ona yang me na tiringi sapche gizum
Tirin sapche da mazel tate tanda yushta
laso
ta tirin sapche dendere ta shine gamsuton shine gamsut tela sapche ji yab nang ne sabje sambatere.
So, in terms of the section of the text which sets forth shamatha meditation, you have 4 subdivisions. And sumpara tiri.
Thongma
Tiri sumpa ere.
sambe nang sere.
And in the previous session we started with the third of these 4 subdivisions, which has another few subdivisions. And so in the previous session we did some of the subdivisions, and we'll continue with the same today. The subdivisions of the third of the 4 principal sections of the segment of the text which sets forth shamatha meditation.
Samba Koran laya nangsik sum yobe nang sumbatere.
And in terms of the third principal section and its 3 subdivisions, we've come to the third of these 3 subdivisions. So today we'll go through, or start the session with going through the third of those 3 subdivisions. And its heading is identifying the experiences arising from this type of meditation, that of shamatha meditation.
Tan desong yung tu pechen desong yu sare. Pen ngen de sine gam yung kapla. Tene kabre
Shinne gomdu.
sine gamdu. Sine magam besem tela pen na kardo to da takpa reshi nyepang ande yung de yu ase.
Now, what's the effect on the mind of shamatha meditation? Well, a person who has practiced some shamatha meditation at least would, because of his efforts in this type of meditation, become aware of the fact that his mindset in terms of not meditating is a mindset with 5 specific shortcomings, simply because the mindset which does not meditate, which does not make efforts to develop one-pointed attention. Here, there simply are 5 specific shortcomings, or 5 faults, perhaps.
Ta tikap gila kar che gogu yuwa dingyo yu sare. Chene gamb kap.
Da, ma gombe kap de yö para ne.
Yö bare.
Da gombe kap de yö pa hakko, tene yö pa hakko ne tene nyempo tendra.
Yeah.
So the procedure here is as follows. As the practitioner, because of having made efforts in the context of shamatha meditation, has become aware of those shortcomings, he will, in order to remedy them, rely on their antidotes. So that's a result happening because of having made efforts in terms of acquiring a one-pointed focus.
Ta di xie yong tu de la xie dang ni song yu sa de. Yong lu qian bo zuo ge nang la kan de song yu ba ji dang.
Da di nyam chikre doa. Nye panga yöle gi.
Ja.
Nyam dang den so nyempo
Kan de
ten gopa.
ja. De yong qian bo zuo nong song zu ji dang. De ne dang nga bo ne song zu ji de ni xie yu sa de.
And here, in terms of this process, there are two traditions. The tradition of the great scriptures and the tradition of so-called key instructions, advice and key instructions. Or one could perhaps say both advice and key instructions. The advice which one may also term key instructions.
Da dongbo de re. Dongbo de la xine gambe gab la kei dam ma song na nye pa nga yong ge do song re.
So to begin with, it's explained in the text in terms of beginning efforts in meditation, here shamatha meditation. According to the tradition of the great treatises, there are 5 faults or shortcomings that would happen precisely because these 5 shortcomings, as was explained, are part and parcel of the worldly mindset.
Wala so. Ta nye pa nga ge na ne nye pa dongbo de le lo che che.
The first of the 5 is laziness.
Ta laziness ne de la nang se gi ye wa sum song yu yo.
And there are 3 basic types of laziness.
Dongbo de pen na ta nga ran zu nam jung ngue sen de de le ga kan yin na ya len do chen me ba ta pa de da pa yong ken wa ta de do chil se.
The first of the 3 types is how laziness is understood in general, namely being about not wanting to do the task at hand and therefore not doing it. One simply, as one has no desire to do the task at hand, one doesn't do it.
Ta di na ne ni pa de shawa ngamba la hembe le lo se gi yo.
The second type of laziness is different. It's the type of laziness which happens because an individual is very much preoccupied with non-virtuous actions. Tenidigi lelo de le sangpo chende meipa son chikla lelo chi sevi jerava.
Ya le sangpo chende meipa penna lengem pa chi la pe chundu chembu yukin.
So it's someone who is able to exert himself in terms of non-virtue, but because of preoccupation with non-virtue, there isn't really an interest in virtue. And therefore, virtuous actions are not engaged in simply. And this is the type of laziness which prevents virtuous actions or constructive action, simply because the person at hand is a person of a non-virtuous disposition simply. a person who lacks interest in virtue.
Tene sumbate ndere dani nye belalo singitere.
Then there is the third type of laziness, which is about the person who has a very low opinion of himself, low level of self-confidence, as it were, and who therefore doesn't do much. It's not laziness in general. One doesn't want to do something, and therefore one is lazy. Here it's about a low opinion of oneself, thinking of oneself as a failure and that one isn't able to do the task at hand, and therefore one doesn't. It's not that one does not want to do the task at hand. It's avoiding doing it because one thinks one isn't capable.
Tandi kandeji chadu yorasana ngen den jong mare ngamaya yabu chen do some tende chang tene shawalangu sinjuk mitowa jiyong yor.
One prevents oneself from acting, as it were, simply because of thoughts such as, well, previously I wasn't able to accomplish this sort of thing, I won't be able to do it now either, and so on and so forth. So the person prevents himself from engaging in whatever is at hand. Because of this mindset that originates with a low opinion of oneself.
Tati tenzo lelo something ali yona nge tingen singla
Mi chikla sumka yona
ji yona ra ni yona ra kantar detegi lelo tenzo yona pena tangbo de yona ne nge tingen singla zolwa koran chig marwa ni pati yona ne tingen sing singete ngo gesemre megewala chundu yoza gewala njuro chig marwa somebody you on the tonane jing jung de yona tang hen jung margo some shinten yebung de chapter.
So all three types of laziness will prevent a person from engaging in the practice of any type of samadhi, shamatha or otherwise. A person of the first category is the sort of person who is not a very active person. There is this streak of laziness in terms of his personality, which makes for or results in that he doesn't do much at all. And so when hearing about training in samadhi, for example, this person may feel that this might be a bit too much for him, or he feels overburdened somehow, and he will never even try because of his laziness or lazy disposition, as it were, mental disposition. Then you have the second type of laziness, which is in connection with people who are able to persevere, people who are able to be diligent, but they are of a non-virtuous, the people of this category are of a non-virtuous disposition. These individuals do not have an interest in virtue, and this is what prevents them from training in samadhi. And then you have the third category of people who have a very low opinion of their self in terms of being able to do one thing or another, and diminishing themselves in this way is what prevents them from training in samadhi.
Ta te dave lelo te ponye la nyempo karaten go byarsana. Tangbo tingen sing la ndonba che tap che.
Now, how does one remedy any type of laziness? Well, before starting to train in samadhi, in order to remedy one's laziness, one needs to find out about the good qualities and the benefits that training in samadhi brings about, in order to find the inspiration it takes to overcome one's laziness.
Donbache, tene nipate, dambate shukchambochi yuanna, jilu pelelote pongukre.
With a measure of quite some force to one's newly awakened interest in training in samadhi, by way of that newly arisen interest, one may overcome the second type of laziness, which, if you remember, or as was just said, concerns individuals with a low opinion of themselves.
No,
sorry, second, nipa song.
Mare. Lelo thongbote.
Sorry, I didn't ji lupe lelo te nipa rava.
Mare dani nyepe lelo te. Nipa te shawangi jinge lelo trova.
Ore sumpa te. So sorry, I mixed up the categories. By way of this newly awakened interest in training in samadhi, because of having found out about the benefits that come from training in samadhi, the first type of laziness can be remedied.
Tene, Zolwa singete yuena, shawa nyamban, nyanjinge lelo te pongre song.
Ja, nyempo den sunginanga, ergo mari.
Ta dik nge kare shubirisana, nyempo tang, pongsa dhan ma shubirwa.
Re, di pecha nangla kana yula.
Pecha tangal tanda nge tenki. Karsana, dila long mongbo shuchi, tri, fona doa, te shasha.
Dian yinang nyepa ngagi nyempo duche gerva.
Yes.
Aspiration exertion. Okay, tangan jest. India nangla jet. Pöyik nangla. Nema songa.
Ini hiya ngdo pöyi nangla. Ina. Di yin chö tenzo kanga long rin doa.
Laso.
Nyepa nga.
Nani jorveit sena.
Tendawe tingen sin te nyepa nga pungwa tong doshe je je tembe jule je wos.
La re ine duche gegi mingde.
Ming te kongtala yung kudu.
Digi gangla.
Ya nge teke te.
Laso. Dat solvar va?
Ja.
Tene dympa jag menar, nej, depar är då.
ya ye pang la do che ye de yin yun de zo wa
Di gang la re do wa.
jong tan ne tan den zo re le ro ri zum den zo pong ta
Di da nye pa nga re nga du chi ge gi. Du chi ge dum pa solva de pa Xinjiang dang po kok sungin do.
tang bong go le lo go ye
Le lo go la. Le lo dang po yang mina le
le
lo
lo
sung.
sum kan go do wa
Nye pa nga gi nang la.
nye
dang
pang la
po
de
de. All right.
tang ye tan de shu song wa pen nan den ba ke shawang nyam ba la shin be le lo tong go gre se le lo tong bo ni nye de de ne ba chimi chom che de
So we have laziness in general, which is about not wanting to do much at all. A person who perhaps prefers to rest a lot, even sleep a lot. It's simply about a person who doesn't want to do much at all. And this type of laziness is counteracted by way of learning about the benefits that come from training in samadhi, so that an interest in or aspiration for practicing samadhi will happen, will work as an antidote for this type of laziness, so that this person overcomes his problem and is able to start to train in samadhi.
tene ta dani nye pe le lo de shona nge kyung ma re sam sam shona tene rang gi ju la de war she pe him ko ye ba ha ko tan jo job ye to ba ha ko tende ge lai lo yi che ba de ba sing de yi che de wa tene kun cho ta de so kan ga le yi che chi che na ten rang nye le chan she ma re che
Det du chigegi nang la sumpa de magave.
samba te
Te solva de ngan so tsarma son.
oya
Nipa de.
Solva de
Nge gyur me ta.
dere shawang nyamba la hin tengin tenzo shawang nyamba de nyamba yi ba ha kone de pung we tabla zolwa sheba
Then you have the second type of laziness, which is about a person preoccupied with a non-virtuous course of action, preferring non-virtue over virtue. Now, this type of person needs to recognize that his course of action is a non-virtuous one and that he needs to correct himself. So, exerting himself in efforts by way of which this is achieved, this type of person can come to recognize that his previous course of action is not constructive, nothing good comes of it, and therefore change his ways, thus remedying the type of laziness that he previously was in the grip of. Then you have the third type of laziness, originating with that the person in question feels like a failure, or he sees himself as a failure rather. That's the perception he has of himself. Now, in order to overcome the resulting laziness, this person needs to find out about the very good and inherent qualities all sentient beings are in the possession of, such as the presence of the so-called Tathagata heart, the Buddha within, a reference to mind's true nature, as well as learning about the 18 conditions that make for a so-called free and well-favored human rebirth, the fact that he has in this lifetime come in contact with those teachings that instruct him how to train in samadhi, and that he in fact is capable of doing this because in this life he has obtained a free and well-favored human rebirth. He has the conditions necessary for training in samadhi, and he is capable of doing so and making achievements in the context of training in samadhi because of the natural presence of the Tathagata heart within. Thus, this type of person can remedy his type of laziness, which till now has prevented him from training in samadhi.
Ta jiru dani nye belalo singende.
De parva.
Yeah.
And here the mindset to be fostered in order to overcome the third type of laziness is a mindset of trust and confidence, of devotion and faith in the natural presence of the Tathagata heart within and the like.
Jitan Chödrak Kavla Jiru Dani Nyeve Lelo Singende Wandu Shortna Chöte Ndrupjugumare.
You see, this type of laziness, the third, where one sees oneself as a failure who can't achieve very much, will prevent you from making progress on the path. It will even prevent you from even making any efforts on the path in some cases.
Penandi Sarvochin to the Kechambuore. De Jiru Dani Evelos Kwan, the Yapochile Kechambure. Kai Sana Not Dikpal and Japachego, Re Somarwa. Tange, Kamadikpa and the Chesha and the Chesha and the Chesha near Tarwas and get the son of top you somebody Tende gone around ye. Tim Majuraj. Dikpa Bahibate Hajan Yaporva.
One way of thinking applicable to this type of person is the following. Khenpo Rinpoche gives an example of an individual who's been instructed to consider non-virtuous actions of his, of the past, and regret the non-virtue that has happened. He's instructed to do so. Now, some individuals, when given this instruction, respond with recollecting non-virtuous actions of the past and feeling very bad about having engaged in those actions, which is not a bad thing. He was instructed to do so. However, he takes it a step further and starts to think of himself as a person who, because of the past non-virtuous actions he's been thinking about and regretting, is a failure, and he feels therefore he can't, or he isn't really capable of making progress, and so he gives up. Rather than taking the following view, namely that, well, great, I've finally realized and recognized and been able to acknowledge that non-virtuous actions are not a good thing. I have a recognition of this now. I've achieved something by way of this instruction that I was given. One can always see things from various, or look at things from various perspectives. And in terms of Buddhism, the purpose of this instruction is not to make the practitioner feel bad about himself and trap himself in some sort of mindset where he can't leave the burden of his past non-virtues behind and take the direction or take a path of remedying what has occurred. Instead, he feels simply bad about himself. The point in Buddhism isn't this. It's not about trapping oneself in guilt. It's about recognizing what has occurred, and as it's about non-virtue here, that this is regrettable, but taking joy in the fact that there is the recognition of this, and then regret the actions, remedy the non-virtuous actions, and to instead feel good about oneself having achieved this, then go on to train in samadhi.
다 티데게 준 레로 숨데 뻥나 데 가르 용도로서나 다 띵엔스는 준용투 신장의 톱 용그래 샤트.
So once laziness in its three perspectives has been remedied, the person then goes on to train in samadhi, and in consequence of training in samadhi, he will at one point attain a mindset referred to as a mindset of suppleness, a more refined mindset obtained by way of the training that one has done in samadhi.
다 대체도 예방아 생게 디나네 다 예빠 당보때 레로 생게들이.
So the first of the five faults or shortcomings listed is that of laziness in its three perspectives, and we've now come to the end of explaining the first of the five, and we'll go on to number 2 in this list of five.
다 대봉제기 년보 누지 얘기나는 누지 당번에 이바파도 레로 봉제기 년보 짱짱 침바래.
라?
레로 봉제기 누지 예 생기 년보 시에서
두치 게가 송민도.
예바시에요 말데 얘기 난네 제가 동번에 이바파도 레로 봉제들이.
So there are 8 antidotes by way of which the five faults are remedied. And the first 4 of the 8 remedies are the ones that counteract laziness in its three perspectives.
라소 다 예빠 나가는 예빠 니빠테 가르레스나 담마 예빠 생기더래.
Then there is the second of the five faults or shortcomings, forgetting the instructions. The fault is to forget the instructions that one has been given in terms of training in samadhi.
다 되게 님벌라 미제빠 생기더래.
And the antidote, evidently, is the samadhi of not forgetting.
다 미제빠 제야들 가르고기였으나 땡엔진 제주 something지라 냠버려 자고래 송아.
And it's a specific type of samadhi at hand here, which has three particularities.
나 제주 동부도 가르랬으나 셈나 살차도 고그래요 송아.
The first particular characteristic of this type of samadhi is that the mindset is one of clarity.
인도도 마가 유주래. 겐데서 단 마슈나 롱 보통 때 간간 거. 에나. 심신도 서베 마르당 담바당.
So clarity in the context of the samadhi should have a great force to it. A bit of clarity is not what is meant here. What is referred to is clarity with quite some force to it. In fact, a high level of force to it.
되네 다데
That's the first of the three particularities.
다데네 mikpa thela sim sexy the never mato tokpa ying parma shewji gogre song nipate.
The third particularity is that the practitioner's focus is a one-pointed one which isn't interrupted by thoughts of this and that. So we're looking at a mind set in equipoise here, a mind which rests in an even state without interruptions of any kind.
That's somebody that 공마티 이 제네 된 셈때 시오나 딜레 때는 성외 대화지 토분이었다.
Now, if agitation is calmed by way of the two first perspectives, then the mindset will be one of equipoise. In consequence of which there will be a sensation or experience of contentment or joy, however one wants to phrase it, a state of well-being, as it were, where the practitioner experiences the well-being that results from the calm state. Because a calm state will induce a sense of well-being.
Tan di kabla simpa songdoa. Simpa se sing de dechil kogu yorwa. Pe lusemika lene lechile chongage dewa dawchi.
So both mind and body are affected by the calm state achieved in terms of both or on both levels experiencing a sense of well-being.
Penna Budratsani mevache. Ane di gela mikpatla semte at sevu ndawchona dorna dusemika la simbajik tobukte tobudwate.
This sense of well-being does occur both as to body and mind when a person has achieved the level of a calm state that we're talking about here. Consider the following example, that of being in a quiet and calm place while the mind rests in equipoise, and where the focus of attention in terms of clarity has a great force to it. That would produce or result in a state of well-being, both as to the mind and the body.
Then
in terms of and this will remedy the fault of forgetting the instructions, evidently. Then we have the third of the 5 faults or shortcomings, which is about both laxity and agitation.
That day, Xinhua tong Gepa se ninde, Xinhua se derela. Do semi patsechi the day on the Gansam some the same the sing, Mik pat sala masela cha, Big Tinton Zoyan, Sala masela cha, Lotela Xinhua checked.
So this is about a dull mindset, where the object of meditation isn't at all clear in the mind's eye as to the practitioner. There may be some level of attention to it, however, the object of meditation here, in terms of the meditator's perception of that object of meditation, clarity with a great force to it isn't at hand. There is sort of a sense of it being perceived, and then that falls away, and one goes back and tries to again be mindful of or aware of the object of meditation, but one fails. This is what is mainly referred to when using the term laxity or a dull mindset. Then you have the opposite, which is that of agitation, which means a mind that to some extent is in a state of turmoil, focusing on one thing after the other. A state of agitation does have clarity to it. However, this mindset isn't capable of maintaining a one-pointed focus. It's a mindset which shifts constantly to yet another object.
Oh
dear. Now, what's the antidote here? The antidote is that of examination. One examines the details of this state of agitation in order to overcome it. Well, in fact, one applies the process of examining something to both laxity and agitation, not just agitation. And if laxity is examined in consequence of it, or the purpose of it is to make the practitioner recognize the dull state of mind he's trapped in, as it were, so that he can remedy that dull state. There are other things one can do too in terms of a dull state or laxity. One can, on a table in front of the place where one meditates, put a bowl with cool water, and when one feels oneself sinking into a dull state, one simply uses the water, sprinkles it on the face, the head, in order to feel more fresh and perhaps become able to focus in a more clear manner on the object of meditation. So, behavior-wise, there are also things one can do to remedy these faults. And here, the fault described is that of laxity. And a person with this problem, namely the problem of having a tendency to sink into a dull state, that type of person is recommended to meditate in a cool and well-aired place where fresh air passes through, which benefits the practitioner in terms of maintaining a clear head, as it were, not sinking into a dull state.
다 정체라고지 난 땡긴 있나야 개홍도 시 또 짜잡
This person should wear thin clothing and keep the windows of the room where he meditates open.
되네 칼라 있나야 헤비 마자오체
And in terms of food intake, this sort of person shouldn't eat heavy foods.
다 거빠데 될 도쇼데
In terms of the opposite, the kind of person who has a tendency for an agitated mindset, this person should do the opposite in terms of the advice just listed. You should wear heavier clothing, close the windows, eat heavy food, and the like.
라소 다 되네 다 가발 레슨고 녜빠 나그나네 싱그 마중 다 녜빠 숨바던 예바데 살았제 그러와 다 나바데 누제 당 두미제 생겼더래
Then we have the fifth shortcoming in this list of 5 faults, having 2 perspectives, non-application and over-application.
단디니라 가르레스나 두미세 갑라나 쫄바체 그래 제버래
In terms of non-application, that's evidently remedied by application.
도제 체타긴도 나는 동냠는 냠버 자고래
And in terms of over-application, equanimity is the remedy.
라소 다들은 안 대샤기 나랑 첨바스에 붙으면도 싱데도 라 디게네 데톱 투다 이제 고승게데 가장 쉽다시 따지 마죠 맞아 페페르체 좀 마죠 데 또저 페페르 고사레 데 옛나야 제 넘버서 좋아하던 저 지지 농로나다 게네 경
Khenpo Rinpoche says, unfortunately, he will end today's teaching here because he's not feeling too well. And in terms of what follows next, namely a list of the so-called 6 powers and the 9 levels of a calm state, he would like to consult commentaries that have a bit of more detail in order to make this clear to all of you. He also encourages you to think about the explanations given and send in the questions that you may have for clarification in terms of you training in samadhi.
다톱 쭉 생긴던저 대세전저 그나도 챙게 남랑 마도 세우시라 민도 대인상 노대진 그나 따고 나 대로
In the Treasury of Knowledge, the author lists more or less just the names of the 6 powers, for example. So Khenpo Rinpoche will consult other scriptures that give quite a bit of detail, example, the Sutra Alankara, in order to provide all of you with some more details.
다가 나신 그 샘내 구 생긴던저 양 로변 토미지 송 닌토지 사생긴 여르 디나는 십라시에요레 송샤
Then there are the 9 levels of resting in a calm state. There is one treatise authored by the Indian Buddhist master of old Asanga, where he sets forth the various levels of the Shravaka path, and within that presentation one finds quite some details in terms of the 9 levels of a calm state.
Chetan semne gusingin to kasakala yongde jere chakshin dasar nande shitai wada.
One also finds quite some details as to these 9 levels in a text called Mahamudra Moonlight.
Lasso Sunande Yedam Jezegwane Tone Yebe Danam Hamjet Cheganaje Balap Trubai Sikbe Tolen Rowai Rowai Show Waya Tanga